My name is Beverly Ann Caldwell, and for 68 years I believed that love meant sacrifice. Not the beautiful kind of sacrifice you read about in greeting cards, the kind where two people willingly lay down pieces of themselves for each other. No, I mean the other kind. The silent, grinding, invisible kind where one person gives everything and the other simply keeps taking, year after year, until the giver forgets she ever had anything of her own to begin with. I was born and raised in Daytona Beach, Florida, the youngest of 4 children in a family that didn't have much but always had enough. My father worked at the orange processing plant for 32 years. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the coast. Between the two of them, they taught me everything I thought I needed to know about love, that it showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for anything in return. I married Raymond Caldwell when I was 23 years old. He was a kind man, a quiet man, a civil engineer who built bridges for the county and called me Bev in a way that made the word sound like poetry. We had 31 good years together before the pancreatic cancer took him in 11 months flat. 11 months from diagnosis to the day, I stood in the cemetery in my black dress, holding the hands of our only son, Daniel, who was 26 at the time and already showing signs of the person he would eventually become. Raymond left me the house, a 4-bedroom brick home on Magnolia Circle that we had bought in 1989 for $112,000, and that was now worth close to $400,000. He also left me his pension, his life insurance policy, and a savings account with $230,000 in it. He had been careful, my Raymond. He had always said, "Bev, whatever happens to me, you should never have to worry." And for a long time, I didn't. But then came Daniel, and then came Crystal, and then came the slow, methodical draining of everything Raymond had spent a lifetime building for me. I want to be fair. I want to be honest, because this story is not about being a victim. It took me a long time to understand that. This story is about waking up. And before you can understand the waking up, you have to understand the long sleep that came before it. Daniel was always a charming boy. Bright eyes, quick smile, the kind of easy confidence that made people want to be near him. He played soccer in high school, made decent grades, went to the University of Central Florida on a partial scholarship. I paid the rest, tuition, room and board, books, spending money without a second thought. He was my son, my only child. That was just what you did. He met Crystal Morrow in his junior year. She was studying communications, and she communicated very effectively, especially when she wanted something. She was pretty in the way that photographs are pretty, polished, carefully constructed, always angled toward the best light. The first time Daniel brought her home for Thanksgiving, she hugged me at the door and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, Daniel has told me so much about you. You are absolutely everything he said you were." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I was lonely in that big house on Magnolia Circle, and here was this young woman wrapping her arms around me like I mattered. They graduated and moved to Tampa together. I helped them with the security deposit on their apartment, $800. I didn't think anything of it. Then their car broke down 2 months later, and Daniel called to say they needed $1,200 for the repair or Crystal would lose her job. I sent the money within the hour. When Crystal's medical bills came in from a sinus infection that had required urgent care, $450, I paid that too. I was their safety net. I told myself that was what mothers were for. The problem with being a safety net is that people stop worrying about falling. By the time they got engaged, Daniel proposed at a restaurant in Ybor City with a ring I later found out he had put on a credit card he couldn't afford. The financial requests had become so routine that I barely noticed them anymore. They needed first and last month's rent on a nicer apartment, $2,000. Crystal's car needed new tires, $640. Daniel wanted to take a certification course to advance at his job, $900. I paid everything, every single time, because I told myself it was temporary, that they were just starting out. That one day they would stand on their own 2 feet and look back at this chapter of their lives with gratitude. What I didn't understand yet was that gratitude requires awareness, and awareness requires honesty, and neither Daniel nor Crystal had much use for either. The engagement lasted 14 months. I know this because I have a notebook, a green spiral-bound notebook that I started keeping about 8 months into the engagement, where I wrote down every dollar I spent in connection with the wedding. I started keeping it not out of suspicion, but out of an abundance of caution. I'm the daughter of a woman who cleaned houses for a living. I know what money is worth. By the time the wedding was over, the notebook showed $47,000. $47,000. I want to say that number slowly so it has a chance to settle. $47,000 from Raymond's savings, from my future. I paid for the venue, a waterfront event space in Clearwater that Crystal had fallen in love with the moment she saw it on Instagram. $12,500 for the room alone. I paid for the catering, $8,200. The flowers, $3,400. The photographer, $4,000. The videographer, $2,800. Crystal's dress, $2,200, which she found at a boutique in Tampa after rejecting 7 others. I paid for the rehearsal dinner at an Italian restaurant in downtown St. Petersburg, $3,800. I bought my own dress, shoes, alterations, hair appointment, and gift, $1,100. And throughout all of it, I paid the couple's monthly expenses because, as Crystal explained it, we can't save for the wedding and pay all our bills. That's just not realistic, Beverly. She had started calling me Beverly instead of Mrs. Caldwell sometime around month 4 of the engagement. I thought it meant we were growing closer. The wedding itself was beautiful. I have to admit that, even now. The October light over the water was extraordinary, and Crystal did look genuinely stunning in that dress. Daniel cried when she walked down the aisle, and for a moment, standing in the 3rd row because Crystal's family needed the first 2, I felt something close to pure joy. My son was happy. My money had built something real and lasting, or so I thought. The trouble started at the reception dinner, where I was seated at a table with Raymond's sister Agnes and 2 of Daniel's friends from college, while Crystal's parents and siblings sat at the head tables with the couple. I told myself it was a seating arrangement oversight. I told myself these things happen at big weddings. I told myself a lot of things that evening that I would later have to unlearn. After the reception, after the guests had gone and the staff was cleaning up, I found Crystal and Daniel in a corner with her parents, laughing and taking photos with the disposable cameras the venue had left on the tables. I stood at the edge of that circle for almost 3 full minutes before anyone noticed me. It was Daniel's friend Marcus who finally pulled me into a hug and said, "Mrs. C, tonight was incredible." My own son looked up from the photo he was taking and said, "Oh, Mom, hey, we're just wrapping up. I'll call you tomorrow." He didn't call for 4 days. After the wedding, the requests became less polite and more operational. There was no longer even the pretense of it being a temporary situation. Crystal had quit her communications job 6 months before the wedding. She found it creatively unfulfilling and had started what she called a lifestyle brand on social media. This required equipment: a camera, $2,000, lighting, $400, a new laptop, $1,300, a course on content creation, $750, branded merchandise to give away to potential followers, $800. Daniel's salary, he worked in IT project management, was not terrible, around $64,000 a year. But they had taken on a mortgage for a townhouse in the new Tampa area during the brief period when interest rates were low, and between the mortgage, their cars, their student loans, and Crystal's business expenses, they were, as Daniel put it, stretched pretty thin. I was the cushion. Month after month, I padded the gap between what they earned and what they spent. Sometimes it was $500. Sometimes it was $1,500. Once, when the AC unit in the townhouse broke during a brutal July, it was $3,200 for an emergency replacement. My own house needed its roof inspected. I put it off for 2 years because the money I had earmarked for it kept going to Tampa. My neighbor, Patricia Hinz, noticed before I did. Patricia was 71 years old, a retired school librarian who had lived next door since 1994. We had a habit of having coffee on my back porch on Saturday mornings, and one Saturday in February she looked at me over her mug and said, "Beverly, can I ask you something personal?" I said, "Of course." She put down her mug. "Because I see the way you live, honey. You haven't bought yourself new clothes in 2 years. You drive a 2009 Honda. You turned down the trip to Savannah with the church group because you said you couldn't afford it. And every time I see you on the phone with Daniel, you look like you're bracing for something." I opened my mouth to defend him. Patricia held up her hand. "I'm not judging Daniel. I'm asking about you. When did you last do something just for Beverly?" I sat with that question for a long time after she went home. I didn't have an answer. It was a Tuesday in March when everything shifted. I remember it clearly because I had just come home from my annual physical, where my doctor had told me my blood pressure was elevated and asked about my stress levels. I had driven home thinking about that, thinking about stress, about what caused it, about what I could do differently, when I checked my phone and saw a text from Daniel. It read, "Mom, we need about $2,800 by Friday." Crystal had a medical thing and insurance didn't cover it fully. "I know it's a lot, but we're really in a bind. Can you help?" I sat in the driveway and read the text 3 times. And then something happened that had never happened before in all the years of sending money. I felt angry, not sad, not sympathetic, angry. Because 40 minutes earlier, while I was waiting in the doctor's office, I had been scrolling through Instagram, something I rarely did, and I had come across Crystal's lifestyle brand account. She posted frequently, outfit photos, recipe videos, day-in-my-life content filmed in their beautiful townhouse with its clean white walls and tasteful furniture. And on Sunday, 2 days before Daniel texted me about a medical emergency, Crystal had posted a video from a spa in Sarasota. She and 2 friends, champagne glasses in hand, grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Self-care isn't selfish, it's necessary. Treat yourself, queens." The spa package she had tagged in the post cost $320 per person. I sat in that driveway for 27 minutes. I counted. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard move from 2:14 to 2:41, and I thought about Raymond and what he would say. I thought about my mother on her knees scrubbing bathroom tiles in houses that weren't hers. I thought about the roof on my own house that still hadn't been fixed. I thought about Savannah, Georgia, where I had never been, and the church trip I had declined because I had told myself I couldn't afford it. And then I put the phone in my purse, went inside, and opened the green notebook for the first time in 8 months. What I found inside that notebook changed the rest of my life. From the month after the wedding to the present, $61,420 in 18 months, on top of the $47,000 for the wedding itself. $108,420 from my husband's savings, from my retirement. From the money Raymond had built, so I could live the last chapter of my life with dignity. Daniel's voice was different now. The warmth had drained out of it. "Mom, we have a mortgage, we have car payments, we have commitments we made based on the understanding that you were part of our financial plan." I let that sentence hang in the air for a moment. "I was part of your financial plan," I said quietly. "Not your family, your financial plan. Daniel, do you understand how that sounds?" "That's not what I meant." "Then tell me what you meant." I waited. He didn't answer. I continued, "I love you. You are my son and I love you with everything I have. But I am 68 years old and I have $60,000 in savings. When that is gone, I have nothing. I cannot afford to keep being your financial plan." What followed was 45 minutes of conversation that I will not recount in its entirety, because some of it is too painful and some of it is too private. But the essential shape of it was this. Daniel accused me of abandoning them at a critical time. Crystal said she felt blindsided. Daniel suggested that perhaps I was being influenced by someone. A pointed look, he said, toward Patricia. I told him that no one was influencing me. That I had come to this understanding on my own, with the help of a green notebook and 30 years of my husband's discipline. When the call ended, I sat in my kitchen for a very long time. I had not sent the $2,800. I would not be sending it. And somehow, despite the pain of that call, I felt something I had not felt in years. My feet on solid ground. I had expected them to be hurt. I had expected anger and distance and perhaps a weeks-long silence before something like an honest conversation became possible. What I had not expected was the campaign. It began subtly. Daniel started calling every other day not to talk, but to update me on their situation. The mortgage payment was coming up. Crystal's brand wasn't monetizing yet. They had to cut back on groceries. He wasn't asking for money, he said each time. He was just keeping me informed. Then Crystal's mother, Sandra Morrow, called me. Sandra and I had met a handful of times over the years, pleasant enough. A woman from Gainesville who wore a lot of turquoise jewelry and ran a small catering business. She said she was reaching out mother to mother and that she was worried about the kids. She said she hoped whatever had happened between me and the couple wasn't going to become a bigger thing than it needs to be. She said, and I remember this precisely, "Beverly, these young people need us. That's what we're here for." I was polite but firm. I told Sandra that Daniel and Crystal were adults in their 30s who were fully capable of managing their own finances, and that my decision was final. 2 weeks after the phone call, Daniel arrived at my door unannounced on a Saturday morning. He was alone. He looked tired and a little thinner, and when I opened the door, he looked at me with an expression I recognized from his childhood, the one he wore when he had broken something and was hoping I wouldn't notice. "Can I come in?" he asked. I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table and he began talking, and I listened. He talked about pressure at work. He talked about Crystal's anxiety. He talked about how they had made some financial mistakes and were trying to get their footing. And then, carefully, he began to talk about the house. "Mom, have you thought about what you're going to do with the house? I mean long term." I looked at him. "I'm going to live in it." Right, but like, eventually. It's a big house for one person, and it's worth a lot now. Have you thought about maybe downsizing? You could free up a lot of capital." I set down my coffee cup. "Daniel, are you suggesting I sell my house?" "I'm just saying it's an option. And if you ever did decide to do something like that, it would be logical for part of that to help us get stable. Since we're family. Since we're your future, in a sense." Future? I was his inheritance. I was a number on a spreadsheet labeled future capital. I was not his mother. I was not a person who had spent 30 years in this house, who had held his father's hand in the bedroom down the hall, who had painted the kitchen yellow because Raymond said yellow was the color of hope. "I want you to leave," I said. The words came out very quietly. Daniel looked startled. "Mom, I want you to leave, and I need you to understand that this house is my home. It is not your inheritance. It is not capital. It is where I live and where I intend to live for as long as I choose. Do you understand?" He left without finishing his coffee. He didn't call for 11 days. During those 11 days, I had the roof repaired. $12,000 from my own savings for my own house. When the contractor finished and showed me the clean, solid work overhead, I stood in my driveway and looked up at it and felt something that was almost fierce. This was mine. Raymond had left it to me, and I was keeping it. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after Daniel's visit. It was from a law office in Tampa, Whitfield and Associates, and it was addressed to me formally, with my full name and address typed in that official, impersonal font that immediately tightened something in the chest. The letter stated that Daniel Caldwell and Crystal Caldwell were seeking to ensure the welfare and financial safety of Beverly Ann Caldwell, age 68, in light of concerning behavioral changes that had been observed over the past several months. It went on to say that the family was considering whether a formal wellness evaluation might be appropriate, and that they had consulted with counsel regarding the possibility of a limited conservatorship to help manage my complex financial affairs. Conservatorship? They wanted to take control of my money. I read the letter twice standing at the kitchen counter. Then I sat down. Then I called Patricia. She arrived in 8 minutes. She lived next door and read the letter herself. She set it on the table and said, "Beverly, you need a lawyer today." She was right. I called Arthur Pennington first, who referred me to a colleague, Margaret Ellison, an attorney in Daytona Beach who specialized in elder law and had, in Arthur's words, seen this playbook before. Margaret was a woman in her late 50s with short silver hair and an office full of plants. She read the Whitfield letter with the calm of someone who had read many such letters, then looked up and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the wedding, the green notebook, the $108,000, the spa photo, the conversation, Daniel's visit, the comment about the house. I told her about Sandra Morrow's call and Crystal's carefully managed tears. I told her about the blood pressure reading at my physical and the elevated stress levels my doctor had noted. I laid it all out on Margaret's desk like evidence, because that is what it was. When I finished, Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What they are describing in this letter is elder financial exploitation, in reverse. They are framing your decision to stop giving them money as a symptom of mental decline, when in fact it is the most financially rational decision you have made in years. This is a well-documented tactic, and we are going to fight it. She outlined the steps, a comprehensive financial audit showing the history of transfers and the current status of my accounts. A letter to Whitfield and Associates establishing my legal representation and making clear that any further communications would go through her office. A cognitive assessment from my physician to formally document my mental capacity, and a review of my estate planning documents to ensure nothing could be challenged later. For the first time since the Whitfield letter arrived, I felt something shift in my chest from fear toward something steadier. "Margaret," I said, "they are my family, my son. I don't want to go to war with my son." She looked at me kindly. "Beverly, the war started before you hired me. You're just showing up to it now." In the weeks that followed, Patricia became something I hadn't realized I needed. A witness. Someone who saw what was happening from the outside, without the distortion of love or guilt. She came over most evenings. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we just sat on the back porch while the Florida dusk went from orange to purple and talked about nothing in particular, her grandchildren in Atlanta, a book she was reading, the birds that came to her feeder. For the first time in years, I had conversations that weren't about Daniel's needs or Crystal's projects or the next financial emergency. One evening, Patricia said something I have thought about many times since. "You know what I used to see, Beverly? Every time Daniel called, you would answer on the first ring. Didn't matter what you were doing. And then you would spend the whole call either reassuring him or figuring out how to help. And when you hung up, you always looked smaller, like the call had taken something out of you." "I didn't notice that," I said. "I know, that's the thing about it. When it becomes normal, you stop seeing it." She was right. I had been so focused on being available, on being good, on being needed, that I had never stopped to ask whether the relationship was costing me more than it was giving me. And the answer, I was slowly understanding, was that it had been costing me everything. I also, during this period, reconnected with my sister-in-law Agnes, Raymond's younger sister, who lived in Ocala and whom I had seen only rarely in recent years. Agnes was 73, sharp and funny, with an enormous garden and an opinion about everything. She had always been fond of me but had grown quietly distant after Raymond died, and I had assumed, without examining it, that the distance was grief. When I finally called her and told her what was happening, Agnes was silent for a moment and then said, "Beverly, oh Beverly, I have been wanting to call you for 2 years. Why didn't you?" "Because the last time we talked, you spent 45 minutes telling me about all the wonderful things Daniel and Crystal were doing. Their townhouse, Crystal's brand, Daniel's job. And I could hear underneath all of it that you were lonely. But I didn't know how to say that without you defending them, so I waited. And I am sorry I waited so long." I cried on the phone with Agnes for a while, not out of self-pity, but out of the relief of being truly seen by someone who had known me for 40 years. "You were not a bad mother," she said firmly. "You loved Daniel too much and yourself too little. Those are different things." I wrote that down in the green notebook. Not money this time. Just those 2 sentences. You loved Daniel too much and yourself too little. Those are different things. The cognitive assessment was scheduled with my physician, Dr. Linda Ackhaffer, on a Tuesday morning in April. Margaret had explained that it was important to have formal documentation of my mental capacity before any legal proceedings could be initiated by Whitfield and Associates. I had mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I understood its necessity. On the other hand, there was something deeply strange about sitting in a medical office being asked to recall lists of words and trace lines between numbers to prove that I was sane simply because I had chosen to stop giving my son money. Dr. Ackhaffer was brisk and kind in equal measure. She had been my doctor for 11 years and knew me well. After the standard cognitive battery, memory tasks, attention tests, problem-solving exercises, she leaned back and said, "Beverly, your scores are excellent, well above average for your age. There is no indication of cognitive impairment of any kind." "Can you put that in writing?" I asked. "I'll have the report ready by Friday," she said, then she paused. "Beverly, can I ask you something off the record?" "Of course. How is your stress?" I thought about it honestly. "It was terrible 2 months ago. It's better now. I've been sleeping, I've been eating, I had the roof fixed. I went to lunch with my sister-in-law last week. Dr. Ackerfer smiled. That's the most color I've seen in your face in 3 years. Keep doing whatever you're doing. Margaret sent the formal response to Whitfield and Associates the following week. It was, in Margaret's words, a comprehensive rebuttal. It included the full financial audit, the $108,000 in documented transfers, Dr. Ackerfer's cognitive assessment, a formal cease and desist regarding any future conservatorship proceedings, and a notice that any further legal action would be met with a counterclaim of elder financial exploitation under Florida Statute Chapter 415. The response from Whitfield and Associates came 10 days later. It was brief. They were withdrawing the wellness evaluation request. They wished to convey that their clients, Daniel and Crystal Caldwell, retain the right to seek further legal counsel if circumstances warranted. In other words, they had blinked. I read the letter at my kitchen table and thought about Raymond. I thought about how he used to say, when something seemed impossible, "Bev, you just have to outlast it." I had outlasted it. Not because I was stronger than Daniel or smarter than Crystal or more righteous than any of them, but because I had finally decided that I was worth fighting for. That evening, I called Patricia and Agnes on a 3-way call, and we toasted with sweet tea and laughed until it was dark. Daniel called me in June, not about money, just to talk, or so he said at the start of the call. We spoke for an hour. It was awkward in places and careful, and there were long silences where I could hear him searching for words he hadn't used in a while. But somewhere in the middle of it, he said something unexpected. "Mom, I think I've been treating you like you were just there, like you were part of the landscape. And I think Dad would be really disappointed in me." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I think your father would understand that you made mistakes and that what matters is what you do next. Do you think we can, do you think there's a way to fix this?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to find out on one condition." "What's that?" "That we start over, not from where we were, from somewhere new, where I am a person and not a resource, where we have conversations that are not about money. Where you call me sometimes, just to ask how I'm sleeping." He agreed. I don't know yet what that agreement will look like in practice. Relationships that have been shaped by one thing for a long time don't reshape themselves overnight. But the call was real. It was a beginning. Crystal did not call. I am not sure she will. There is a particular kind of person who cannot apologize because apology requires acknowledging wrongdoing, and acknowledging wrongdoing means confronting an image of yourself that you have worked very hard to maintain. Crystal is that kind of person. I have made my peace with that. In July, I took the trip to Savannah that I had turned down 2 years before. I went with Patricia and 2 women from our church, Ruth and Diane, who were both in their early 70s and both, as it turned out, in the middle of their own quiet reckonings with family and money and what it meant to be old in America. We stayed in a bed and breakfast on Jones Street, ate shrimp and grits at a restaurant by the river, walked through Forsyth Park in the morning when the light came through the oak trees in long gold ribbons. We went on a trolley tour of the historic district, and I bought myself a small painting from a street artist near the market, a watercolor of the Spanish moss hanging from the trees along the squares. I put it on my wall when I got home, right next to the photograph of Raymond. On the last evening in Savannah, sitting on the veranda of the bed and breakfast with a glass of sweet tea and the sound of the city all around us, music from somewhere down the block, the low voices of other guests, the smell of gardenias from the garden below, Ruth said something I will keep for the rest of my life. "You know what I've been thinking? We spent so many years waiting to be taken care of, and it turns out we're pretty good at taking care of ourselves." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from the stomach. "Ruth," I said, "I think you're absolutely right. There is one more thing I want to say, and it is the most important thing in all of this. It is not about the money. The money mattered, of course it mattered. Raymond worked 30 years to save it, but it was never really about the money. It was about what the money represented. My time, my labor, my dignity, my future, my right to exist as a full human being with needs and desires and a life that belongs to me. When I gave it away without condition or limit, I was not just emptying a bank account. I was emptying myself. I was saying over and over in the only language they were willing to hear, I am worth less than your comfort. I am here to serve. I do not matter except as a means to an end. And the moment I stopped saying that, The moment I closed the green notebook and sat in my driveway and let myself feel angry was the moment I started to come back to life. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no thunderclaps, no sudden revelations, no Hollywood music. It was just a woman in a driveway at 2:41 in the afternoon, looking at a text on her phone and deciding, for the first time in a very long time, that she was not going to answer it right now. That is where freedom begins, I have learned. Not in grand gestures, not in lawyers' letters or court victories or the satisfying click of changing the locks. It begins in the small, quiet, almost invisible decision to put yourself first. Just once. Just for a moment. To let the phone ring and sit with the silence and understand that you are still whole, even without being needed. My name is Beverly Ann Caldwell. I am 68 years old. I live alone in a house on Magnolia Circle with a new roof and a yellow kitchen and a photograph of Raymond on the mantel and a watercolor painting of Spanish moss from a street artist in Savannah. I have $60,000 in savings that I intend to spend carefully and joyfully on the rest of my life. I have a neighbor named Patricia who drinks coffee with me on Saturday mornings. I have a sister-in-law named Agnes who calls every week and argues with me about gardening and makes me laugh until my eyes water. I have a son whom I am learning, slowly and carefully, to love in a new way, a way that does not require me to disappear. I have a green notebook that I no longer use to track what I give away. These days, when I pick it up, I write down what I keep. It turns out there is quite a lot, and it turns out that all of it, every single bit of it, was mine all along.